What you're about to hear is a conversation with Gabe from Helmgast about running Kult Divinity Lost. We invited him to share his experience and perspective as a game designer and GM, and to talk through how the game works at the table. This discussion assumes that you, the listener or viewer, have at least some prior experience with GMing role-playing games. We are not presenting this as a step-by-step tutorial or a classroom-style teaching session. Instead, this is a practical, conversational deep dive into mechanics, intent, and how GM and player moves function in actual play. Now, with that in mind, let's get into the conversation.
Welcome back, everyone, to episode 4 of How to GM Kult Divinity Lost. We are continuing our conversation about rules, about clarifications, about ideas, and how we do things using the system. And with me, as in the last couple of times, I have Crystal and Gabe. And today we're going to start that big chapter of combat, conflict, action, and violence. We'll see how far we get, but it's going to be definitely interesting. So, Crystal, who are you, and what are you looking forward to?
Who am I? I am Crystal. I am 1/3 of the Illusion Horror and Con. And yeah, I think I'm very excited about talking about conflict and action and combat as well, but maybe more emphasis on the conflict and action portions.
Great. And the Herald himself, Gabe.
I am Gabe. You are probably tired of hearing my voice, but this is a highly expected topic.
Never tired of hearing your voice.
Yeah, I'm Gabe. Thank you. I'm Gabe the Herald. I've been with Helmgast Peternalo, the creative director of Kult Divinity Lost, for the past 4 years. I do a little bit of everything, and I feel like combat is probably the topic that I talk about the most, maybe ever, in the Kult context, not in real life. Don't get me wrong, or maybe I do. Who knows? I'm
okay.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
And let's maybe start off with a simple question. What's so different about combat in Kult compared to the other systems out there? Not to name one specifically. What is so unique?
What is really unique? So, Kult, as with any other more narrative-leaning game, so the narrative side of the spectrum, it doesn't change the rules to accommodate combat. So you keep following the same structure, and the one that we've been talking for the past few episodes of the moves and the conversation. Whereas more traditional games, you have a mindset change between combat and the rest. So you might stop to get a map, you might stop to draw a grid, you might stop to roll for initiative, to seek rules about cover and source of damage against specific armor types. And Kult simplifies that a lot to encapsulate the feel of an action sequence in a movie. So you follow the camera around for a few beats of the scene, and you zoom in, as in you examine, you break apart the action as much as you want to, or you just roll for a single move and zoom out and describe the entire conflict. And when I say conflict, I say anything from a fight to a chase to an argument to intimidation to anything that involves a threat, anything that, an obstacle. So it's the same rules, it's the same trade of GM moves, it's the same everything. It is both easier if you're new to role-playing games, it's easier to wrap your mind around that. But if you come from traditional games, it can be difficult not to have a turn order. It can be weird. But hopefully we will enlighten you today and make it easier. So,
What about you, Crystal? What is shining from the Kult Divinity Lost combat system?
I mean, everything that Gabe mentioned, honestly, I love the fact that there's no initiative. I love the fact that like it is like a movie scene instead of a like formulaic board game. Formulaic board game situation. I really love the fact that, and I think this has a lot to do with the cult game in itself, is like I do really love the fact that the players have a lot of control over what happens in the conflict. And it's not just, I do this, I roll this, and then this happens. It is I am a person in a movie and I'm doing a thing, and maybe you roll, maybe you don't, but it is part of a scene and a narrative, and it's I like that a lot more than the all right, well, let's roll to make sure that things, happen the way it happen in a random enough way to make it interesting or
Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
And maybe I'd like to kind of set the scene and pick up our former example of Crystal in the apartment with the janitor at the threshold of the entrance, maybe now holding a gun, and it is seconds before the escalation, before the scene escalates. Gabe, can you give us maybe a bit about kind of a general overview for how combat begins, given the scene and the setup that we now have?
yeah. So, before even that, but we'll get to that, before you create an opponent, or you bring a stat block from the book, before all that, there is some things you have to get down. So the rules, they do not change, okay, but and you have GM moves, okay. But what do you want to work with and have a really strong grasp of is the pressure thing. So it has to be in the back of your mind, like a little monster, like nibbling at your brain. You have to sense the pressure of it. And all you do is leverage that pressure against the player, bring it up, bring it down. And all of the moves in combat specifically, and now we're talking violence, but it can be for a chase, it can be for, again, an argument, anything. You need to understand that you are compressing things, like zooming in the moves and picking things apart. You have to have this thing in you. And for combat, it becomes a constant push and pull where you make the decision of hyper-focusing on a single action or taking a step back and overseeing everything. Before we begin combat, there's two things you have to understand. The opponent's stat block, you don't have to have it, but you have to understand what an opponent can do. So the opponent has abilities that shape what you can do with the opponent. So some are simple stuff like they do more harm if they use their natural weaponry. So any unarmed attack that they do will have +1. Some alter the player moves. So there's the one that the character can't see whether the opponent is lying or not. Tons of abilities, specific abilities to creatures written in scenarios. There's a lot more in the upcoming books. So anything can be an ability if you write that in. But abilities are like GM moves. And when the player rolls to read a person and my opponent can't be read, you can't ask if they are lying or not, that's a hard GM move. Same goes for anything described under combat, influence, and magic, and attacks, and harm moves. Everything is a GM move. So if this janitor has the combat unique move that says he cannot die, every time where he would die, I am even if I don't say it, I am making the move to stop this character from dying. Same would be he lunges and covers room distance for unarmed attacks. That's a GM move, that's an attack. Same would be for influence. A typical influence move would be to bag, to not die. So this is an opportunity for you to stop attacking and stopping, the violence and listening to the character and maybe conceding, maybe hearing that they have something to give you if you don't kill them. That's a GM move, offer opportunity with or without price. And same would be for magic, but where I want to get is harm moves. Whenever the opponent is harmed, so they take 1 or plus more wounds, you get to do a thing. And this thing can be a counterattack even at a 15 plus in engaging combat, where the player safely harms or would have safely harmed the opponent. Deal 1 harm, at least 1 harm, the opponent makes a move. The spotlight shifts back to you as a GM. And that you have to understand. Sometimes the spotlight is on you, sometimes it's on the players. And it's likely you saying who has to act in terms of initiative, but we'll get there. But most times you can just ask the players, what do you do? And whoever has, the most eagerness to act will be acting. That's just how players work. They are in a team. They realize they are in a team and they will volunteer. So, to backtrack a little, there's an action and a reaction that causes a reaction and causes a reaction. And you as a GM, you're just either like picking the reactions and actions apart and really focusing or not. A simple harm move would be you deal 1 harm, but I describe the attack bouncing off the character's armor. But it deals 1 harm. And another harm move would be die. So you deal 1 harm, even if the creature has like 10 available wounds, it dies on a single attack. It's just up to you. So it's the pressure thing, And the wound tracker tells you when you should stop the pressure, generally. So if you have a creature with 15 wounds and the combat is, dragging itself, it's just harm galore and gore and splatter everywhere, and you're at 13 wounds dealt to the creature, that's a clear sign for you that maybe you should be looking at stopping here, but you don't really have to, because it will die in the last wound if you want it, and most of the time it will, because it's what the last wound is for. But all the way there, you are having this visual tracker of how long this combat has, lasted. So initiative, keeping it in mind, I don't remember exactly what happened, but I think Crystal was pointing the gun at the janitor, and she took a few shots and realized that the janitor was an undead being.
Yeah.
Now, as a GM, quick judgment call. Is the revelation pressure enough, or should I launch an attack? Or should I jump scare Crystal? It depends on what happened before, but saying that she rolled a -9 on observe a situation, and I just gave her that, or I just told her that, and the pressure has gone, or it needs to go up because of the -9. I might just say that the janitor descends into an unthinkable rage and runs at her, Or if I want to keep the pressure as is, or I want to see where it goes, because, it's okay to see what happens, I might ask Crystal, what do you do? And that's the initiative. And we'll have to include another character in this to talk about turn order. So maybe David's character will make a comeback here. We'll see. But that's the initiative. And the initiative is just a quick judgment call. Should Crystal act, or should I act? What makes for a better story? And there's no right or wrong answer most of the time. The right answer is, this is fun. And most of the time, both things are fun. So you cannot really miss that. But you as a GM, when you take initiative, when you take the spotlight, it's always a hard move to take the spotlight. So if I keep Crystal from acting, that's a hard move. And I am bumping up the pressure because I am impeding her of, doing anything. If I take the spotlight and announce the attack, and she can dodge the attack, that's a softer move. So it doesn't amp up the pressure that much. But if I take the spotlight and I shock her with the revelation, she loses one stability, and I describe the janitor, jumping across the room like a huge dash right on top of her to deal one harm that she cannot even dodge. That's an injury entry. That's a bit of a hard move in comparison to her being able to dodge, but she can still take the wound and retain some control, because it might be a 15+ and she gets a flesh wound or whatever. But if I take the spotlight and she's lost stability from the revelation, and I deal the damage, and the janitor jumps at her and she takes a serious wound, that's an even harder move, because there's no continuation from that. We'll have to come up with something new. There's no move here. There's no dice roll that tells us what to do. But this is me taking the spotlight. So just like a player, I have to be, conscious of what I'm doing. And if it's not a serious wound, it's a critical wound, that's an even harder thing, like a harder move. And if I just say that she dies, which I can because I am the GM after all, and it might be part of the revelation, she got stopped in her tracks upon the revelation, and she rolled to keep it together to not freeze in fear, and she failed again. So she's frozen, and I take the advantage to deal a wound and kill her. That's part of the thing. I'm just delivering the consequences of previous moves. But that's the initiative. When I act, as a GM or when you act as a player, we are shifting the spotlight. So what happens if we don't have turn order? You just follow your gut. You act once, and then the player acts once, and then you might change the spotlight back to you or another player. It really depends. Can you do initiative in Kult? Yes. You can maybe roll 2d10 and add an attribute and see who rolls higher. But you as a GM won't have you won't have dice to roll and you have no attributes to roll unless you want to roll 2d10 plus the creature's combat rating or something like that. If you really want more traditional experiences at your table. But ideally you don't have initiative, and when you do, it's part of act under pressure or avoid harm. If I say the creature will attack Crystal and she has the option to act, that's her initiative in a way, if you look at it, because she can dodge, she can engage in combat, she can just take.
Or if I have an advantage that lets me do something.
That's where the edges come in, because if I know Crystal has the Daredevil advantage, and I can be harder in the GM moves because I want her to spend her resources and feel the power fantasy of the advantage, I will do so. And I will do so and remind her of the advantage, because it will be a GM move as well, offer an opportunity without cost, or with cost, because the cost is an edge. But I will say the creature will jump at you and you will take a serious wound. Do you want to spend an edge? That's a possibility. And she is the player and she can choose. Maybe she wants or maybe she doesn't. And that's part of the horror of the conflict. You have to keep making judgment calls and taking hard decisions as the player as well. It's not just the GM. And all that to circle back to this beautiful moment where I say the best combat is the combat where you ask players those things. Not really resource-based questions, so whether you spend an edge or not, but it can be, he jumps at you, Crystal, and you don't have your gun in hand. Do you want to maybe get it first and shoot, or tackle him, or like take him unarmed? What do you want to do? And if Crystal says, I want my gun, she might have to act under pressure. And this is me focusing on she doesn't have a gun. But if she wants to get a gun and shoot, it might be just an engage in combat, because, okay, she takes a gun, draws the gun and shoots. So that's the last focus. And that's the pretty economics of combat. You either focus on something or not. And you, unfortunately, you have to have the pressure bar in the back of your mind, and you will be making those decisions. And it can be difficult at first, but with time, you will develop this sense of danger and how to wrangle it in the fiction,
Yeah.
And it will be obvious to you in those moments. Oh, you won't be questioning yourself. Well, should I be focusing on this or that, or you just have it in your head. Wow, maybe she can suffer a bit because she didn't have a gun. And then you ask for a move, or maybe you punish her for not being prepared, or whatever. Just you as a GM. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Something I was thinking about, I guess, to maybe, like, that was a good description of the sort of nuts and bolts of the actual conflict. If I'm going to zoom out a little bit on that, in order to help people maybe design scenes or design opponents. For the scene, what are you trying to get out of this scene? Like, what are you trying to get out of this combat? What are you trying to get out of this conflict? How is this going? How is this conflict, combat, action, what have you? What is that contributing to the story? Is it a revelation? Like, now we know that the opponent is an undead creature. Is it just trying to build pressure within the story because they're trying to do a hard thing, and part of the hard thing that they're trying to do is to get past opponents, get through different obstacles. And then also thinking about opponents as not just stat blocks, but as living, breathing people or entities. They have motivations. They live somewhere. They associate with other people and or entities. They are creatures with complex backgrounds. Now, you don't have to like outline this entire complex background, but you can keep this in mind as far as like, okay, well, what kind of unique moves for this creature can I have based upon what I think its background is, what its motivations are, what I want to get out of the scene.
David?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary, because that's ultimately what I'm asking myself every time. Is a conflict necessary, or can it be like one or two actions and this situation is resolved? If it is a simple janitor who's just in the way, then yeah, it could be in a swift action situation is resolved depending on what and how the players would approach this conflict.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's one of the, just bringing back what Crystal said, it's one of the GM principles that your creatures and opponents or whatever, they should have an agenda. Mm-hmm. It's assigned motivations to all your NPCs, and I do think like combats can be had for the sake of combats. Maybe in this time, as we have played more or less through it in the other episode, it was just fun to bring this janitor because we have David control. Oh, he's the murderer. I remember now, because he was controlling and he knows Crystal wants to stop him, and this is enough reason to have a combat. But I want to highlight here that I feel like very few creatures and humans or whatever will fight to death in any setting whatsoever, but it's traditional games make it seem that you have to utterly destroy every enemy in a grid-based combat. And in Kult, it might be that in the middle of the combat, this janitor, will awaken from the possession because dealing like 3 harm breaks the supernatural link between him and David. So you should be looking for sense. Yeah, you should be looking for those opportunities.
It makes sense that most things would have self-preservation impulses.
Yeah. Most have a harm move where they attempt to run and then flee the scene.
Yeah.
And if it's not written in there, you can just obviously do so yourself.
I actually wanted to, before we continue the discussion, maybe pull one of the examples, let's say from a gang member in the core rulebook on 240, as a reference so that we can have one, let's say, civilian or simple-minded NPC as an antagonist. And I would like to kind of maybe describe and go through the individual points. So usually the antagonist, the NPC, starts with a description about their surroundings and where they can be found. And then we have 3 attributes, or more, depending on. What do they represent?
The combat, influence, and magic.
Yes.
Combat is the ability to hurt others and their general stance on violent conflicts. So the gang member has a... So the numbers are really the amount of moves they have. There's very little interaction with the system. In the Illusion and the Borderlands, I have written that lictors have a... They spread around the magic level because they really don't do magic. They do illusion weaving. But if they have a magic of 5, they assign, like you as a GM assigns up to 5 points between different realms of influence. Not influence the attribute, but influence of the illusion. But otherwise, it doesn't really matter much. For the gang member, it is written that they attack at the slightest provocation, which is a GM move. You know, it's a combat waiting to happen. But I can, as a GM, as I introduce the gang member, perform the GM move, announce future problems, for example, in which I say that you realize that this person is just has an itchy trigger and they want to fight someone. And I warn you that if you don't watch yourself or just be saying dumb stuff around them or pushing some buttons, they will fight you. That's a GM move. Influence is the influence over their setting. So, and by influence, I mean like knowledge, strengths they can pull, what they can offer, their general reach. So the gang member has apply knowledge of the city's city underbelly. So it's someone that knows who can hurt others, who sells weapons, who sells guns, where they can hide, who they should, like which names they should be afraid of, something like that. And purvey, I don't know how to say this word, illicit services. So they can sell something for you. So they can maybe sell the drug, they can maybe sell the weapon, or for the right price, they can hook you up. So that's the influence. They don't have any magic, but magic is actual supernatural effects. So insight and magic knowledge. So insight into a principle, they can seal pacts, they can see through the illusion, they can navigate the borderlands of the dream, things like that.
Yep.
And attacks, if you're writing the stat block, you would write here, and the gang member has a little bit of it, how they act in a fight. And it's just a little guidance of what arms, firearms they might have, and what kind of attacks they do. And the attacks beneath, they are the GM moves you do when you have the spotlight and you want to attack the player. So it says the weapon or the weapon type. For example, knife is a knife, but it could have been bladed weapon if someone has claws. It could have been natural weaponry. And light firearm can be a handgun, can be snub-nosed revolver, something like that. And light machine gun, everyone knows, but what is a light machine gun? Seems a more powerful gangster if you have that. But you have the attack name, so lunge attack, it means that they jump at you and you deal 2 harm. And if the attack connects, so for example, Crystal fails in the engaging combat and I attack her, she will suffer 2 harm. It can also happen if she fails to avoid harm, or maybe she goes for the weapon to shoot at the janitor, saying that it's now a gangster janitor or a janitor that can lunge attack at 2 harm. And she fails to act under pressure and get the weapon and have that one headshot that stops the creature altogether. She might get the weapon at -9 and shoot, but she will take 2 harm because I've made the move to deal 2 harm. I could have made the move to deal a serious wound, but this is a move to deal 2 harm. And more on harm later. But wounds and harm moves below are the harm moves that I talked about, and the hit point tracker for the opponent. And I wanted to highlight that opponents and player characters have asymmetrical harm tracker things. When a opponent takes 2 harm, you mark 2 wounds and you do a harm move that represents the harm they've taken. So you cannot, realistically, you cannot narrate that the shot bounces the metal hide of the creature if the opponent is being stabbed, because it doesn't make sense. But you might say the blade bounces off the metal hide. And player characters, when they take harm, they usually either take a wound if you want them, but if they take harm, they have to endure injury with plus fortitude, minus harm, and plus armor if they have it. So if they have a Kevlar vest, I think it's +1. And you do what happens in the move, what the move says. So if they roll a 15 plus, they maybe take the wound. Maybe they take the stabbing or take the shot, but it doesn't affect them like mechanically. And if they roll a success with complications, they take the wound, they take the harm, sorry, but it's something else happens in the fiction. So maybe they are bleeding, maybe they go prone, maybe they are dazed, or anything else you want to invent. And on a -9, we have the legendary -9 endure injury, where you can choose to die as a player. So there's an option for players as well. Even at no tracked wounds, you can die from a single attack, even if it's 0 harm. And 0 harm, yes, you still roll to endure injury. There's a quick description, I think it's a table somewhere in the Game Master section, that tells how much harm so-and-so does. So 0 harm would be an unarmed attack. 1 is a light attack, maybe a slash, maybe a punch, like a well-connected punch. 2 harm would be like a gunshot, being stabbed. And 3 harm is on the heavier side, where you take multiple shots, multiple stabbings. It's very difficult to come unscathed from 3 harm. And anything beyond that is highly destructive and highly improbable that the that the character will not take a wound.
That list that you're talking about starts on page 190 of the core rules, if
Nice.
people would like to look that up.
Okay. So I guess one question that I've been asked also often is, do you need to make a harm move every time you take 1 wound for the creature or the NPC? Or is it cumulative per action that they kind of suffer?
Yeah, by default, if you describe anything that comes out of the harm dealt, you are doing a harm move. So even if I say, yeah, it doesn't stop the creature, that's a harm move, you cannot run from that, because you as a GM have to respond. But you don't have to do elaborate ones. So a harm can just be a harm. It doesn't have to elicit a counterattack or that the creature flees or dies or whatever. It's just really up to you. But if you do a harm move, you don't want to bundle in other GM moves. But if you have multiple player characters at the scene, you might want to. So I describe what happens because of the harm you dealt as a player character. And I say something else for another player characters, and then I shift the spotlight. So anytime the spotlight is on you as a game master, you have to do something to keep the story going. And you either, back to the basics, the very first episode, you either resolve the conflict or you continue the conflict. And if it's been too long, if it's dragging itself out, you should really be resolving the conflict. So it might just be that we kill the janitor after like 2 moves, but something else happens. Maybe the neighbors will arrive or something like that. So I announce off-screen problems or future problems.
Right.
And so the wound moves, they are different in a sense that this is the reaction to the attack being dealt to the NPC, right?
Yeah, it's just a way of saying that as opposed to traditional grid-based, turn-based combat, you should be narrating something. In D&D, for example, you will say how the attack lands, but it stops at that, and a harm move entails something more, so the story has to be pushed. Because there is no like turn to follow, like turn order to follow. There's no initiative. You should just be doing stuff. And the harm move tells you to do that. But it's very, I think it's intrinsic to GMing that you will keep stuff happening. You will keep, the evil going, the conflict, the action, the whatever. So it's just a reminder on a fundamental level, let's say.
Since we're on the topic of wounds, maybe we should touch a little bit on wound stabilization. On the character sheet, just to, because I think I was confused about that a bit, just in general, as far as like whether characters keep the wounds, or I guess it's mostly what makes sense in the narrative.
Yeah,
as we've been talking about other things too.
Just one thing more on attack before we get to wounds. When the player attacks, they ideally, not always, but you must choose an attack from the equipment that is being used. And it doesn't necessarily trigger engage in combat. So for example, if, let's say, the janitor lunges at Crystal and she spends an edge and she wants to draw her weapon to shoot the creature. And it's like typical zombie movie, you get the weapon, headshot, the zombie falls. So I know the janitor has like 2 wounds, and a typical gunshot deals 2 harm, and the janitor will die anyways. And she spends an edge to draw the weapon before the creature jumps at her. It can be engaging combat, or it can be, for example, act under pressure, or it can be, for example, avoid harm. It can be a way of avoiding harm. With the knowledge that shooting someone isn't necessarily dodging or whatever, but for this specific thing it can be, because you as a GM knows that what's written in the avoid harm move, and because she wants to be quick about it, it's reflexes based. So you just consider that she's using, let's see, combat shooting, -1 ammo, page 139. So you have to choose combat shooting 2 or overkill or multiple targets, for example, and you have to track the ammo. but it doesn't necessarily mean you're rolling for avoid harm or whatever. And you, the GM, should be looking for opportunities to keep it diverse, so it's not every time engage in combat, even though it makes sense that it would be. But if you have a character with +3 reflexes, you should be letting her shine a bit using that. And wounds, and taking wounds and stabilizing wounds. So the principle here is that an unstabilized wound means that I get to create problems as a GM until that is stabilized. So if, say that you were scratched by the janitor and you were bleeding, I can keep making GM moves to worsen your situation based on the bleeding. So the janitor will be able to track you. I don't know if it's the janitor that tracks bleeding people from the other example, then I don't remember. But I could make a move to do that. Or I could make a move to where you pass out. Or I could make a move where you have trouble holding your handgun and you take -1 ongoing until you stop bleeding and wash your hands. Or at least deal with the blood. Or I could make a move to kill the character. So you've bled for long enough. You will die here if you don't do something about it. Or just, you die. Different, like softer and harder moves.
Yeah.
And you stabilize a wound by doing things that make sense. So if I'm suffering from pain, like I've taken like a huge beating and I've broken my arm and, it's painful, I can just maybe take something that eases the pain. Maybe I typical noir detective thing, I drink alcohol. I take some pills for the pain that stabilizes the wound. As a GM move, I can unstabilize it and stabilize it when it makes sense in the fiction. Or as the result of a move. So if you act under pressure, but you fail, and you exert yourself, like you must be quick, and then it just uses too much of your strength. But you get the gun and shoot the janitor, but now I have unstabilized your bruising and whatever, and now it hurts again, and I can keep making moves to do that. But the thing is, when you erase... Oh, and first aid. You can do first aid as written in the rules. You can just check that and do as it says. But I would say that only the people that know how to apply first aid can apply first aid. So it's not because you have a first aid kit that you magically understand how to stop someone's bleeding or how to save them from, I don't know, cardiac arrest or whatever. It depends on the wound, But either way, once the wound is stabilized, you keep it, and that's not written in the rules at the Helmgast's fault here, but you keep it in the character sheet as long as it makes sense. So maybe for a broken arm, when you take the cast off after some time, is when you erase the wound and you can take another wound in that place. But if you're playing a like John Wick style, like high octane thriller with a lot of combat and blood geysers and splashed brains and whatever, maybe you want to keep erasing wounds more often, even if the character has just take a shot to the shoulder, like a heroic gut shot or whatever, but they have bandaged it themselves and they have slept and now they can continue acting, even if realistically you would know that someone who take a shot to the arm wouldn't be able to move like that and continue to take wounds like that. But it doesn't really make... It depends on what I'm trying to say. It depends on the genre you're trying to emulate. So gore fest, splatterpunk, you are likely to stabilize wounds that continue bleeding because it's part of the genre, you know?
Yeah.
You have the mechanical implications of an unstabilized wound. So if we're doing like Hellraiser-ish Splatterpunk and you continue bleeding, it's okay to stabilize and continue bleeding because the infernal powers keep draining you of blood and it's cool, but you don't take the -1 to your rolls. And so long you have an unstabilized serious wound, you take -1 to all rolls. And the same goes for a critical wound, but that can be stabilized and the -1 continues because it's critical. Some people like to over penalize. So you take -1 for each serious wound, and by the end of the game you can be rolling against -5 at all times.
Yeah.
It's a death spiral, a different one than keep it together, always taking minuses and advantages, always being at a negative modifier. But it's up to you. By the rules, you just have -1 for the serious wound and -1 from the critical wound.
We did get a question from the questionnaire about specifically how to handle groups, combat involving groups or gangs. Is there some different way to handle those as far as cult rules are concerned?
Yeah, conflicts and gangs has its own section in the rules. We don't get a full description of combat and anything like that. I think we get examples. But gangs, you basically put together like the size of the group against the other, and whoever has the largest size takes pluses. So they deal more harm, and I guess that's it. Not many people use it. I can say that I use it a lot because you have to, okay, so you do have to make a choice whether you want individual wound trackers for each member of the gang, or do you want to just multiply one wound tracker? So for a large gang, of gangsters, I would do multiply it by 3 and have like 6, 7 wounds total, and leave it at that. And harm moves represent like how the gang behaves in combat. So with 2 harm, I know someone, like one person out of the 10, 15 people will drop dead, or maybe more. But you zoom out a little bit when it comes to gangs. And gangs like generally like groups of people.
Yeah. So you could be dealing with like a war situation to combat within a battle.
Yep.
Yeah, but it truly comes down to like a small gang versus an individual will deal +1 harm to the individual. But you have the entire like table in the 158, like page 158. So if it's at the same level, it stays the same because everyone's fighting. But if you have difference, the harm changes. But that's about it. You may do some moves representative of the gang. I know that for the Illusion and the Borderlands, we've written harm moves for Jekyll groups and Zealots. So a shared tracker, like wounds tracker, and shared moves. But okay, narratively, okay, so what happens is that you shift spotlight, And when the spotlight shifts to you, when you showcase what happens to the gang as a harm move or whatever, you will be describing more, and the player should be targeting more people. So you can be, for example, like a street fight of like 5 people against 10 people. You, as the player, the narration of the attack, you will choose the attack anyway. So for example, unarmed attack, punch and kick. And you will describe that you will just flail hands and hit whoever you hit and all that. And I, as the GM, or you listening, should describe what it happens as a whole. So a punch may hit the first opponent, but might miss the second, and a third guy enters the picture, and haymaker, I forgot the word, and kicks your legs, and you fall. You failed the move, so you get a counter attack. So he kicks your legs, and you fall, and someone stomps you, but then you shift the spotlight, and you take harm, and maybe you injury or whatever. And the spotlight shifts to another character who might come in to help you or might not. So there's this push and pull, and because you have more people, it becomes more chaotic. And I feel like with highly chaotic environments, you shouldn't be really like hyper focusing on specific actions. It all happens very quickly, and it's very turbulent by its very nature. And you can cut between different beats of the combat. So you describe the character drops and gets stomped in their head, and you pull the spotlight back from him. But when it comes back, he's already up and trading blows again and already performing another attack move. But again, wound tracker for your gang. Either you do it like together, you mush it up and use one single tracker, or you divide. It's really up to you. But the more people you have, the better it is to just merge wounds. So multiply it by a number that makes sense and trust your instincts. You don't really... I know you can end up with 20 plus wounds for a very large gang of armored people and all that, but you really don't want to stay in these 20 plus wounds for the entirety of the combat. Yeah. Maybe at half, you have it in your head that, okay, it comes to a halt and they will surrender because they have lost too many people. But the players take wounds as players would. It's just more or less harm than it would have been. So a small gang of players, like 4 players against 10 people, 15, 20 people, they will just take more harm. So any attack that you do, for example, the gangster combat shooting to harm, since they are at larger numbers, and if I attack with combat shooting, it means that multiple people are shooting at you. It will take an additional 1 or 2 steps of harm. So a simple combat shooting 2 might turn into a combat shooting 4. And then it's harder for you as a player character to survive that. But that's the gist of it.
I just want to say that there's, I think one of the good examples that I've recently used is from the Black Madonna, the KGB Commandos, which has a section for individuals and a section as a group combatant. And yeah, it's pretty much what you described. Just in case any of you has the Black Madonna, it's on page 160, the KGB Commandos stat.
The core rules at 159 also has a harm and gangs section with suggested wound trackers and harm moves. So just give it a second look.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Okay.
Depends on. I think again, we're going back to like, what do you want? What do you want to get out of this scene? Like,
Yeah.
what is the intention of the scene? What is the goal of the group?
There is a
What are your
question
players'
that
goals?
since there's no initiative, and we have like 3 players against 7 cultists, typical scenario, like, and I do something for the cultists, so they attack you, whatever. Does every player have to roll to avoid harm? Does every player get to engage in combat at the same time? And here's where the basics of the conversation and what we've been saying about pressure and all that come in. Because in conflict, and we'll get to the conflict example, it begins to branch in problems that you create. But ideally, it should not branch indefinitely. So when you shift the spotlight back to the players and everyone rolls, you're creating branches. So the cultists attack, but David wants to run. So what do I roll for that? I tell avoid harm or act under pressure. But Crystal stays and fights. That is engage in combat. But then we have a third player that is just super scared. Maybe it's a teenager that David and Crystal have come to save from the cultists, and it's the other player character. And so they keep it together. But now I have 3 moves to solve, and either continue the branch and maybe even branch a little more, but I have to continue, and I have this thing in my head about the pressure, and I want to resolve the conflict. And it's the judgment here is when to resolve it. And so I have 3 different conflicts. One wants to run, one wants to fight, and the other wants to withstand the violence. If you do that, it's better generally, just generally, to not overwhelm yourself with the spotlight changes. It's better to focus on a character. So in your head, you have to make a quick judgment call and say that, well, since David wants to dash and Crystal wants to stay, maybe we stop at a point where he is a few steps back and she is the logical first target. So she gets to engage in combat, and from her role we continue the others. So I might put a little bit more pressure on Crystal and say David can run if you roll a 15 plus and down some people, or maybe the teenager character will be able to, find some breathable room to, snap out of it and run as well. So it's one of the other. You're helping here ultimately with your action. And I will follow from that roll. So if she rolls on -9, it might be nice now to shift the focus, let her suffer a wound, suffer harm. She maybe rolls to endure injury or whatever. She takes the brunt of the consequences of failing to respond to the threat. But then I shift to the other characters. And, it's a thing you have to make, you have to balance, But yes, you can tell your players to, everyone rolls and I'll resolve everything. But you might be overburdening yourself. Even more so if you have trouble coming up with consequences for for a single complication, but for multiple complications at a time. And because you have to leverage hardness of GM moves, if someone rolls a -9 and another rolls a -9 and another rolls a success with complications, it can be hard to make it seem fair or cinematic and fun enough for everyone. So I say just to focus on a single character. Just like a movie, that the camera pans to Crystal,
Yeah.
What does she do? And you follow from that. It is
Helping
a
or
branch of
hindering? So we know that players often might resort to group tactics, as I might call it, and want to either support each other in a combat situation or I would say in a conflict situation. That can be whatever it might be, or they want to make it interesting, and they might want to put somebody else in a bad spot. We all know
Yes.
that you don't have to be the fastest; you just have to be faster than the last one.
Yes. So here's the real difference between Kult and other traditional games. Is that when you have a violent conflict such as this, and now we're tackling a multiple people gang cult, when Crystal stops and shoots at them and David runs, we can frame the situation as Crystal helping David run, instead of Crystal engages in combat as an opportunity for David to run. Seems like only semantics, but when Crystal wants to create an opportunity for David, it means that David might run without ever rolling to do that, because he's seizing an opportunity without cost. But if I, as a GM, and this is me branching, this is the multiple threads of combat. If I want to frame the escape and the help, I could use help or hinder. And what help or hinder is, the player rolls, and the roll influences the other player's roll. So here I am framing David's escape, so the focus is on David. But if Crystal rolls, I know that she has to get a complication on a 14 or less. And she's gonna roll with generally the same attribute as David. So it has to match somehow, but I myself, I like to create new ones. So she's helping with violence, but David will escape with act under pressure. So coolness.
I mean, I would also argue that I would be doing act under pressure, because providing cover is not necessarily trying to kill people. It's providing cover.
The attack can be suppressive fire.
Yeah.
That's coolness. So see, there's a lot of arguments you can make here. And for the game master, you need to know what you want to showcase. So if Crystal has +1 coolness, which is not spectacular, but it's positive, but she has -2 violence, then providing this cover, we can, focus on the fact that she's not really a shooter. She thinks straight, and she's thought of staying, so that's her coolness, acting, and willpower, having the courage to stay. But, she's not a good shooter. She doesn't know what she's doing. The weapon might jam. She might, hurt herself. She's not really good at this. So we focus on violence. So, arguments you can make, and it's a narrative decision. It can feel like you're writing a story. You can have an argument that you're directing a movie and showcasing, the right stuff. But really, it comes down to gut feel. What do I want to highlight? And you make a quick decision about it. Yeah. If, as a GM, if Crystal has been failing a lot during this scene or the previous scenes, I might just concede and say that, this is her moment to win, and she uses her best attribute. But if she's getting a lot of success, and I feel like it's time to flip the scales a bit, I will say that now that you really are in it, and it really depends on you, you must roll with violence, and you showcase the weakness, the weaker side of Crystal. But with Upper Hander, it's one of those moves that you don't make a GM move on a 10 to 14, but you should consider doing so. Not necessary, but she helps. And then David rolls for his escape, which that is when we resolve the conflict of David, of whether he runs it or not. And that's another whole can of worms. But for Crystal, if her interference has unintended consequences, which is when I make a move, so it's one of those that 10 to 14 has just a lesser impact, and that's the GM move. I do have to make something appropriate, so maybe she creates the opening for David and he doesn't even roll, but she will be trapped in a combat here now. Or maybe David has to make a hard choice of, you see Crystal being swarmed. Do you really want to flee? And he needs to, leverage the consequences. And we get this, that's where the conflict, like combat shines. You have the hard choice to make. And you'll see in the conflict, the combat example, that the GM just really wants to look for opportunities to make players choose between two different outcomes. And it's easy when you can just run or stay, but if you can run or stay, but running means Crystal might die, then that's where the horror of combat comes in, and you don't typically have it in grid-based combat like traditional games. You might have, like really good GMs will make it happen, but I hardly see it. So, not to shame anyone, but I hardly ever see it. That's the truth. That's the truth. But it might happen. I just don't see it.
Yeah.
But branches, I'm branching the conflict and zooming, and if I'm zooming in, maybe David, if he has to roll, maybe I zoom even further, and it's just like compressing the fiction or dilating the fiction. Do I want to explore this role and break it down between actions, or do I just want to have it done?
Right.
And you get a feel for it. And I like to emphasize that a lot, as a GM when things are boring.
Yeah.
For you, at least. You just know it. You feel it when you're running a combat and it should feel thrilling, but it doesn't. You just have to pull up your GM pants and do something about it and make a decision. And the decision sometimes is just to end the combat, but sometimes it can be to introduce more problems and more twists and more. But it's difficult when you feel the boredom growing and the table is dying. You can, not dying in the everyone's taking a wound, but dying in the entertainment sense. You can just stop it and call it done and resolve all conflict.
It's really not the end of the world if you run into sort of a lull in the action or a bored moment. You can recover. It is okay. Just resolve it, move on, and get back into where the story is actually interesting. I feel like and David, you can also, you may have also heard this too, but like I feel like I hear a lot of prospective GMs talking about like, I haven't done enough like preparation, or I'm not very good. I'm really nervous and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, the only way you're going to get better is by doing it. And again, it's not the end of the world if something gets boring for a minute. Like, you'll be fine.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, high chances are, if you have a combat in your game, it can be boring. It might probably be boring if you do like 3 rolls or more. Chances are, if you're having combat for the sake of combat, so the janitor, if I overextend that janitor, and overextending means, for me, it's one threshold, for Crystal is another. But if I overextend the janitor, which it's a simple opponent, it will be boring, you know? I have, as a GM, and this is hardly something you think of on the spot, it's like hindsight analysis. I have showcased that she's fast enough to draw a weapon and shoot the guy. I have showcased that she has -2 violence. I have showcased that David possesses, well, that other David now, not the one that is fleeing the cultists. Maybe that happened before in the story, we don't know. But David possesses people. I have done like 2-3 revelations. I have showcased 3-4 characteristics of Crystal. I have done enough. It doesn't have to be bombastic and life-threatening, and you know.
Yeah.
I wanted to, unless you have something to add, I wanted to talk about equipment
No, please.
here, because
Yep.
unarmed is an equipment. Before we get to the combat example, so do you have anything to add?
I would maybe just say, if combat becomes too complicated, or you lose kind of the attention of players and both while you're looking up rules, statistics, or whatever, don't just go with what your gut tells you and what drives the story forward, and just make an executive call and stick with it.
Yeah.
Don't let looking up rules and specifics kind of bog down your game. I know there are players that might want to do that, but again, that brings us back to the expectations and the discussion beforehand. If you want to have a rules as written and every single thing needs to be tracked, every bullet needs to be accounted for, then you just need to state that at the beginning. Otherwise, it will be the game that you are running. And if the rules are slightly different for a certain scene and then different for another, that's what it is. And that's okay. And that's okay.
Yeah. You are the
Yeah.
GM. You can run the game that you want to run.
Yeah. Equipment, page 138 of the core rules, the English core rules. Might be different if you're reading a different language version of the game. But the equipment is everything, like every gear that has attack moves. And it is unarmed. If you buy the equipment weapon deck, I don't remember the name now, it has the unarmed equipment as well. And weapons and armor, they have the base harm, like the attacks that have a base harm, which can be 0 if they are more like combat maneuvers, like grappling or disarming.
Disarm, yeah.
They might have an ammo, which is a resource that we'll get into. They have a distance of the attack, which for Kult, we would call it as range bands in game design. So you don't say the specific, like how many meters you can shoot reliably and do this much damage, but it does say, yeah, within room distance. Some rooms are bigger than others, but within room distance. And you have a vision in your mind. So we have arm, room, field, horizon. And attacks are written usually as the attack name, so cut, slice, and stab. And between brackets, we have the value of the harm value. Equipment is written like generally, so an edged weapon can be a knife, stiletto, dagger, can be even a sword, like sword if you really wanted to, like a spear or whatever, if you're running a medieval Kult game. Then we have unarmed edged weapons, crushing weapons, chopping weapons, and then firearms. Handgun, like stronger handguns, like a Magnum handgun. Submachines, assault rifles, machine guns, rifles, shotguns, explosives, and at the very, very end, not a weapon, but armor. And the list of special equipment, such as a dog that has attack moves and counts as an equipment. And it has 1 to 3 wounds, available wounds that it can mark. But it has other stuff like first aid kits, stun gun with its own like thing, like a silencer, flashbang, all that thing. But following up on the, we do a attack move as a player. If I am unarmed and I am kicking, punching, and tearing, I am not describing that I take a single jab at the person. I am describing that we are throwing hands and we are going ham at each other. We are just, just bashing each other up like, bah. It's a fight. It's not a sparring session where you dodge one kick and then you dodge a punch. We're beating each other up.
Choreographed. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to know what it looks like, you can search for videos of street fights. So you flail hands and you fall to the ground, and some people will apply excessive force, which is the other attack under unarmed that deals an additional harm in comparison to punch, kick, and tear, but you focus entirely on killing your target, disregarding your own safety, and we'll get into that. But we have lock, which is a grapple, a tackle, an arm lock, lag, block, chokehold. We have shift, that you create distance between yourself and the target, so you might push them, you might try to take a step back, like take a dash back, or alternatively, you can get closer. We have disarm, which is self-explanatory, and excessive force. But for GMs, what you have to understand here is that if the character is using lock, so you are in control of the target until they break free, this can be an engaging combat. It will likely be a act under pressure role. It can also be, and for creating different dynamics, if you want to focus on the character's willpower, the courage to tackle someone as repulsive as a Purgatide, for example, you might ask the character to keep it together. So you suck up the fear of getting closer to this person and hurting yourself. Maybe, in the embrace, in the chokehold, you might cut yourself in the barbed wire or nails poking through the character, the Purgatide's face or whatever. You might have to keep it together. And on a success, you lock the opponent in place. Now, for how long do you keep it going? It's up to you. It's up to the fiction. Because if he's being held in place, someone might come in to deal an attack. And I, as a GM, would assume that the opponent, this Purgatide, cannot defend itself. So if it's David grappling the Purgatide and Crystal comes with a handgun, she might just get in real close and discharge all of the bullets, and empty a clip. And she might just deal harm, And for a handgun, overkill would deal 3 harm, and she would use 2 ammo. And she might not even need to roll because the creature is being held, so I just mark 3 harm. But then I get to make a harm move, and then I can free the Purgatide if I want it. Or maybe it just dies. That's when you as a GM must have the feeling, the knack for for when to do stuff, for the quick judgment calls.
The
Do I want to
the
resolve
instinct.
this? Yeah. Do I want to resolve this block, this grapple, this tackle, or not? And then I might deliver the consequences of, David skip it together. So he had the courage, but maybe it was dumb courage. Like, he's a brave man, but it was really dumb to hold a creature wrapped in barbed wire in a chokehold. So now I get to deliver that consequence of, yeah, you cut yourself here, you endure injury for me. And that would have been written in the harm moves as a counterattack of sorts. But that's me, And then I can present or maybe I could make a GM move that says, well, David, the creature squirms and tries to break free, and in its attempt, it will cut you. Do you want to keep the chokehold so Crystal can deliver another 3 harm, and you cut yourself and must endure injury, or do you want to let go? So that's another GM move. That's an opportunity, And that's, again, because I really want GMs to get that, that's the beauty of combat in a narrative game. The player must make the choice. If I stay, I am being cut, and I might take a wound, and I might die if I roll badly enough at least. But it was my choice. I have the agency as the player to either stop this threat here, because it's an opportunity with a cost, and I don't want the cost, so I don't get the opportunity. Or, or I continue or I don't, whatever. And the GM, back to the basics again, pressure. If David continues to hold the creature, do I ask for an avoid harm, for reflexes to maybe, moving out of the flailing of hands? Maybe it's a coolness, maybe, it depends. But the attack move is the same, it's locked, so it's being blocked. But since I shifted from the courage, because we know that David has the courage to hold this creature in a chokehold, we move to another attribute. We highlight something else. But it's the same idea of choosing an attack move. But for Crystal, she's holding a handgun, and she has ammo to keep track of. And ammo, you can see it like a wound tracker for the the handgun. It's how much you can reliably keep shooting without the GM taking the opportunity to make a move to complicate things for you. Even if the character...
I just wanted to say I really like that description of ammo, because I feel like a lot of people hear ammo and they think of like, okay, well, I have like 12 bullets, or, like it's the number of actual things you shoot, but it's actually the harm that your weapon takes as you continue to use it, I guess.
Yeah. And one ammo encapsulates however many shots you want. Crystal can empty 2 clips on the Purgatide if I want it to be really dramatic. So for a 9mm, she's gonna shoot, 10, 15 times. I have never shot one. But she empties the clip, and the Purgatide is riddled with bullets. But since let's say she rolled a 15 plus for this, because the Purgatide has gotten whatever, we can just say that she reloads the weapon and continues to shoot, and that's 2 ammo, nothing more, nothing less. But as the Purgatide frees itself and she does another overkill, so for a total of 6 harm on the Purgatide, like a legendary Purgatide. I think it has like 5 wounds. And it continues to act, but she's zeroed her ammo. We could keep track of how many reloads she would realistically have. And I might say that she may reload and clear the ammo track, which is fine. But I could also take the opportunity to make a GM move to say, but can you reload fast enough to protect David? Like shoot again and protect David. And then that's an act under pressure. And maybe that's part of the engaging combat move. I don't have to make a specific act under pressure just to reload, but I could. And and branches again, maybe that's an opportunity to help David, but she has to roll, and maybe she rolls 10 to 14 and the creature manages to attack David before she shoots, but it's not full harm. Whereas it would deal like 2 harm, it now deals 1, but David gets to injury. So I am applying like consequences between both of them and shifting the spotlight between both of them. And you might ask, but David he might be able to avoid harm before that ever happens. And yeah, branches. Maybe she's rolling again to help her hinder instead of act under pressure. She's, continuing to overkill the same attack move, but she's, reloading and doing her stuff. And whatever help she manages to get helps David to avoid harm. Yeah, avoid harm. The plus reflexes roll. Or act under pressure, or engage in combat if he gets up and, wants to trade punches with the creature. So really, branches, it's all the same idea, but as a GM, you just want to create opportunities for different roles, mostly, and to highlight different characters in different moments. So because Crystal dealt 6 harm, and she might have the option to help David, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to keep the spotlight on her. It can be David. So he got up, he got cut, he's already bleeding, and it's time for him to continue the fight at least until Crystal manages to reload the weapon. But that's the same role. He avoids harm with her help, so plus modifier from her if she succeeds. And that might be enough,
Yeah.
That's the idea of branching and making judgment calls. And again, it's difficult at the start because you're not in a grid-based combat, but it gets easier and you develop a refined instinct for these things. But it helps to look at your previous combats and drawing a line as you remember things, which might be wrong, but it doesn't matter. As you remember things, beat by beat. So, I introduced the cultists, but then I asked Crystal to do something because she wanted to do something, and then she rolled. And from here, 2 things happened. The cultists attacked her, but David rolled to something else. And from here, 2 things happened. Just drawing a line to see where it goes, to see how much you're branching combat. But this is really being a nerd about it. And I have done it, so if you like the way I run things and you want to learn more about my way of running combat, you can do that. And feel like a nerd because we're doing awesome stuff anyways. Not a problem. But just if you really want to study and develop your storytelling techniques. If you're serious about it. Or pretentious enough like me.
Serious or pretentious. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's cool anyways. Whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's it. And multiple targets multiple targets. It's the same attack move, but Crystal gets to choose if she wants to attack David as well for whatever reason. And both the Purgatide and David would have, suffered harm.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's a choice, right? Like you can inflict more harm on the Purgatide, but you would also harm your friend, your companion.
Saying it's
who's
two
holding them?
Purgatides, you have the option to hit both of them with multiple targets at the cost of an additional ammo in comparison
Right.
to the overkill. And you deal less harm, but you're,
Yeah.
gunning down both of them because you're
Yeah.
badass. And for gangs, it might just be that you could let players choose just overkill, combat shooting, and it deals harm to the same wound tracker as everyone. But since it's a gang and you're narrating harm to different people, like multiple people at once, you might want the player to choose multiple targets attack or force him to or her to choose that. That's not a problem. It makes sense. It's realistic. And
I guess you can also consider what advantages do they have. Do they play in, fast as lightning, quick, and backstabber, and so forth? So, these can influence also the behavior of a combat situation, of a fight.
Yeah, a lightning fast, the advantage is a good example. So 118, the page, you have blinding speed, which allows you to engage in combat with every opponent within the reach of your weapon as a single attack. So you choose one attack, and for this one you could, for example, choose disarm. Deals no harm, but you're disarming everyone. And I might decide that the player can run to act under pressure here, if it's disarm or shift or whatever. But it's the same attack. You apply the same harm. You do all the same things, but it's multiple targets. And there's other edges.
Yeah.
Martial arts, just underneath it, has roundhouse kick. Same attack, but you engage in combat against multiple people.
Yeah.
It has disarm. Yeah, the Chuck Norris. It has disarm and as an edge. So what's the difference here? Disarmed as an unarmed equipment attack, you might have to roll for it. But if I spend an edge, I can bypass the roll, as we have explained earlier. I can just spend an edge and get the opponent to be disarmed. Is this overpowered? I mean, it's the player's fantasy. It's their story as well. They should feel powerful because it's their advantage. But yeah. The officer has edges to fight by someone's side, and it can be take cover where you gain 2 armor. It can be granting positive modifiers. So coordinate fire has everyone by the player with officer advantage side take +1 to their moves, to their next rolls. And it's the same as help or hinder, but you get the lesser effect automatically, and you don't roll for it. So that's the player saying, yeah, I bypass this roll here and just do that. So edges are just that.
Okay. And how long would you say edges are valid for? Because we had the same thing for holds, which might or might not carry over from scenario or from session to session, but not from episode to episode. How about with edges?
It's within the scene. So I think all of them are for action scenes, and you don't really need martial arts experts.
I think besides the burglar who can do it any time in the future or something.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between edges and options in the rules. An advantage that grants edges will grant. You cannot have 2 of them. I cannot have lightning fast and martial arts expert. You
can't roll
either
both
or.
of them?
Yeah, it's either or.
Yeah. You wouldn't roll both of them. You would choose the one most fitting for the scene.
Yeah, but for options, you can have hunched options for later in the scene from multiple advantages. So Sixth Sense it lets you act first in a threatening situation throughout the game session, which I would define as the episode, so between downtime. Not game session, but downtime episode thing. And I let them keep it. And that combos with edge advantages. Because if I have the act first and I have, let's say, I don't remember another that lets me deal harm. Let me see.
Well,
I think most let you roll to deal harm.
I don't recall any, but what I'm just remembering as well, which we unfortunately didn't cover in the previous episode, is the magical intuition, especially when it comes to combat situations. Could you maybe just briefly kind of give us a bit about insight about how magical influence or not magical intuition would either help, hinder, or change a situation for a combat or conflict situation?
Whenever you choose to, for example, for the listener, they don't know, but we're going to use the Angel Acracial for the combat example. You can learn about the creature's nature and you can see the open chest where you can shoot, for example. So it's more like learning a weakness or how to act. So if I see that the creature is slow or something hinders it, the GM performs a GM move to offer an opportunity. So it's really that.
Okay.
For any knowledge gathering things, you just, as a GM, you should look for opportunities to reward the player for that, because it's part of the advantage. It's an advantage. It's called an advantage for a reason. So you offer an opportunity. So you see the bare chest, you see that the creature is slow, you see that it cannot die from gunfire, you see that even if it's been cut and sliced and slashed, it won't bleed. You know? It's giving the player some leverage. And if it's from an advantage that you're learning those things as a player, it hurts if things have a cost, because the cost is already implied in the fiction. I am at the cost here of fighting this humongous creature that I know is slow because of chains, tying it to the wall or whatever. But I don't need to suffer more than I already am by being in this combat and risking my life. Mm-hmm. But some creatures are hideous enough that when you see their true nature, you have to keep it together. Just because of the sheer terribleness of what they are, like a Kyreth. Hardly anyone can act cool in front of a Kyreth for many reasons. Mostly human nature, but they also have this aura of madness that warps your senses and whatever. But if you see one, dude, there's a stability sweep like right away. And if you don't freeze, you hope that you don't fight.
No.
Yeah.
You hope that you flee. But that's it.
Okay. Crystal, any comments or last words on that?
No, I don't think so. Combat example? Well,
actually, before that, one last thing. And before we kind of go into an example, we touched it briefly, but I think maybe some clarifications on cover and armor in that sense. In the first place, the armor that you wear is most likely self-explanatory, and it's immediately kind of counterbalanced in the move section. So if you wear a Kevlar vest, it's -1 or something, or +1 dice roll to endure injury. But regarding cover, so we have a
Modifier.
Modifier,
Plus one
yeah.
modifier.
Plus one modifier, yes. Yeah, regarding cover, is there anything specific or particular that we need to consider?
No, opportunity with or without cost. There's no hard and fast rules because when you get to write those, it becomes very granular, very, very fast. So if you are partially behind cover, because we're not like action by action, so I get out of cover and shoot. We're not being super detailed about it. It's more like you roll to engage in combat, and it assumes you're coming out of cover and put yourself in harm's way against an able opponent. But if it's a light cover, +1. If it's a like really good cover, I guess you grant the player +2. If both the player and the opponents have cover, I wouldn't count anything because everyone has to put themselves out there in the same way. And if you're not really coming out of cover, if you're just like putting your hand out and shooting for suppressive fire, it's not even like an attack, really. It might be like an attack that's 0 harm, like lock, where you lock the characters in place, the opponents. But it's not like you're being harmed anyways because you're behind cover. And you as a game master may destroy the cover if you want it to happen. And pressure, handling pressure. You may shoot a warning that, this is a very like big creature, and if you stay behind this wall for too long, it's gonna destroy it. It's gonna run over it. And you let the player choose, because that's the beauty. So you wanna test your luck here? What do you wanna do? And the player will likely say that they want to keep moving. And that's when you roll for act under pressure to move unseen or to shift cover between hits, So dash and dodge and do a barrel roll can be a avoid harm. And if you keep fighting, that's an engaging combat. So no hard and fast rules. Just do what feels right.
Okay. Great. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget, we have a questionnaire out that is valid for all the episodes. We're updating and we're checking it. So if you have questions, please submit them there, or contact us directly, either on the Illusion HorrorCon server, on Helmgas, or anywhere where you can reach Gabe, or also on the YouTube in the comments below. So that's from me, David. Crystal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is Crystal. And that questionnaire, we are just going to add on questions to it. So it will be for not only the upcoming episode, but the previous episodes as well. So any questions about any of the topics, if we get enough, then maybe we'll do a review episode as well. But yeah, I'm Crystal. Thank you so much for watching. Yeah, like and subscribe.
And Gabe.
I'm supposed to say that, right?
Yes, you are.
Thank you too for the chat. Loved it. It's my favorite topic, combat, and I am anxious and excited, more excited than anxious, to do the example, because a lot of people will actually hear what I think of during combat. And it's a messy thought pattern, but we'll make it true.
Fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So until then, see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.